This is a video to go ahead and work on details of setting up a one-point perspective. So we have the drawing here, which is a furniture plan. So it gives the objects that we need to draw within the design. And we will be creating a one-point perspective. We'll be doing it of the east wall, so you can see that I have the red cone of vision, just like we've been practicing with, so that you can see that direction of what we'd see. The ceiling height for this room will be 8 feet. We'll set the MP with the person standing 11 feet back from this wall, and so I've added the 2 feet on to make it the MP of 13 feet. Additional information when setting up the grid will be that it will be standing over 5 feet from the south wall, and so you'll notice that the north symbol and the fact that this is the north wall because of the direction that the arrow is pointing. So if we take a look, I just kind of oriented it here. We've got the north, so this would mean that this is the east, and when we draw it, then we'll be imagining it, viewing it from this angle. In viewing this, it's really helpful as a technique to plot out 1 foot by 1 foot boxes on the floor plan. Originally, of course, the floor plan would, not having the boxes, looked like this. And then I just took a few moments to go ahead and put that in place, so it's a little bit easier for me to plot out where these items are within the drawing. This video will be just to set up the grid, and then there'll be an additional one about drawing the furniture pieces themselves. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and follow these details, and I'll keep trying to put this within the screen for you to see that as much as I can. So at some points I'll have to tuck it off to the side, but we'll get started now. Okay, so I know that I have an 8-foot high ceiling in this particular room. And to know how wide to make my grid, I'm going to go ahead and measure that east wall. And so in measuring the east wall, it's a 1/4-inch scale drawing that we're referencing. It's an 11-foot wide back wall plane. So the first thing I'll do, and with my paper here, I have grid paper underneath it. I'll center it as much as possible, but still leave room for that floor area. So the first place I'll start out with is the 8-foot high ceiling, just so I can kind of see where I want to center it. I think I'm going to take it up just a little bit higher. Okay, so I'm going to have an 8-foot high ceiling here. And then the measurement of that back wall was 11 feet. So I'm going to go ahead and get that set up to be 11 feet. Positioning it, as much in the middle of the paper as possible. Okay, so it looks like we're going to have 11 feet there, and here's the ceiling, and here's the floor line. So the first thing I'll do is just go ahead and put that framework in place. I think I'll also do it where I just do a nice bright color so that when paper goes underneath it, we can see the frame a little bit easier. I'm sticking with an ultra-fine Sharpie so that it doesn't get too wide. It's a little bit trickier to get the depth of it on the bar so it doesn't go underneath it. But all right, a little easier with the triangle, not as much depth to where I'm trying to get that in. Okay, so again, this is 1-point perspective. I'm using a 1/4-inch scale as my back wall plane because in our view, we're looking directly at that east wall. All right, so we've got east wall right here. We have an 8-foot high ceiling. I measured the width here, which was 11 feet. And therefore that was an 11-foot wide grid. The next pieces of information was the VP, which is positioned 5 feet up off of the ground. The other point of information I know is that it's 5 feet over from the south wall. So because my view here, the south wall's to my right, I'm going to count 5 feet over. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So my VP will be here, and then I'll establish how far up. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And I can count that because I have the grid paper underneath it. utilize a little bit of a micron here in 08. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to establish the VP. And at this point, I can take it from this and go out to the corner. So I start to establish that three-dimensional effect. Don't need my bar, so I'll get that out of the way. And I think actually I'll continue utilizing this red. So I'm going to take the point here back to the VP and draw my line out. Take it from the VP over here as well, out in this direction, and then from the VP to this corner, and I'm just going to take it out as far on the page as I may possibly need, just because I have the surface to work with. So now I have the VP here, I'm going to the corner and bringing that out. The next thing that we need to establish, and I'll just do this in pencil, it's not as critical, but I do need the floor line across the bottom here. So we need to have that, I'll just label it as FL. If you can see that with the floor line, that is our base. And then the VP is 5 feet up off of the ground and what we were speaking of. So that means that I establish a horizon line across the center, and this just means the viewpoint of the person looking at it. So we have the VP establishing that MP. Where I stopped drawing that line was established in the way we calculated it here. Now I could count the boxes that are underneath it, but in interest of time and just feeling more secure in what I'm doing, I would say, you know, if you're under pressure of time, I just physically just measure it out to make sure my eyes aren't playing a trick on me for how to set up the boxes. I'll do the same thing here, and I will label it MP, which stands for measuring point. The next detail will be to identify the points of our grid along the baseline. And so the way that I'm going to do that actually is I am going to mark the 1 foot marks along here, along the bottom. And luckily we have grid paper, so all I'm doing is just highlighting it a little bit darker for you to see. This may not be something that you need to do, but I want to make sure that you can see where I am taking the 2 points through. Also, if you're having trouble seeing through the paper, this may be something that you need to do to feel a little bit more confident in your accuracy for where things are. And I'll stop here because that is the MP. I am drawing it on a piece of trash paper, you know, maybe something that you're using vellum, which might be a little bit thicker. So to establish how I'm going to draw my horizontal lines, which mean they are parallel to the back wall plane, I want to create this grid. Now in the grid, you dimension it, or you can measure it, I should say. You can measure it. When you're in a perspective, you can't, because now you're sensing depth. The only thing in the 1 point perspective that we can even think of measuring is this back wall plane. But we have to establish how it's going to get bigger and bigger and bigger as we go through. And the way we identify those 4 lines is through our measuring points. Measuring point here, and then the marks that we do in the 1 foot increments. So I'm going to take my first mark and I'm going to center it through the MP to the first 1 foot mark here. And I'm going to make sure that for the thickness of my medium, I'm right on the mark. I'm going to do the same thing again. I'm going to look at the thickness and make sure that I'm going dead center. I'm a little bit off, so I'm going to make sure that my pencil runs through there, then go back to this again and make sure that that's running center as well. If your boxes aren't getting bigger as they're coming closer to you in distinct increments, you know that you're lining something up incorrectly. So either you can look at how this progressively gets bigger, all these spaces, or I mean, you can get to the point where you've drawn all of them and see, but you might even be able to tell before you spent the time drawing all the horizontal lines with your bar. So I'm going to go ahead and just finish these all up. Again, I'm just going to make sure that as I'm getting closer, the spaces in between these are getting larger. It may take you a bit of time to get these things lined up, but it is worth the time investment so that your drawing will be accurate. Okay, those increments, I'm happy they are getting bigger. They're getting wide, the space is getting wider every time I'm coming closer down the line. So I'm going to go ahead and run my horizontal lines. I'm going to take right where my pencil intersects with the lead. Again, make sure that you maybe do like a little dot or a little mark and make sure it's hitting right where this red line and the mark from those two meet up. If you don't do that, that's where you're going to get off in your accuracy. So just taking a moment here to check my weight, make sure it's going through the middle. Again, going right through the center. So now I've just established all the lines as they're getting closer to me because I'm thinking of all these foot increments coming from the back wall plane. So that's where this kind of grid can help you start to put together where things are placed. The next piece that I should do now is to go ahead and take my 1 foot increments. You can even mark them like that, or if you feel you can take the triangle and just see that they go through the center. You don't need to do the marks again. I'm just going to exaggerate it so you can see it in the video. So we'll take our mark here. We'll go back to the VP right through the center there, the VP, and bring it out. That is my first foot mark. Then we'll have the next foot, again just checking that the weight of my pencil lead goes dead center through my mark for accuracy. And we're establishing our grid. These are all the lines that go perpendicular to the back wall plane. And as I go through for the line weight, I'm just rolling my pencil as I go, so it's like you're sharpening it while you're moving across. Like so. We now have the floor established. I'll continue working my lines and the method to work on the walls. It doesn't really matter which wall you start with. I will show the one over on this side. And get started here. So again, you're identifying where that pencil line and the marker meet, accommodating for the thickness of my ultrafine Sharpie here. So so that it goes down dead center through there. Just taking a moment to do that. And just like my floor, every time it gets closer, that distance between the lines should be getting bigger. Okay, we now have that side plane. I'll go through and probably just use a little bit smaller triangle now. And I'm going to do the foot marks along the wall here, and then bring the lines out so that I have the 1 foot increments on my 8 foot high ceiling. So we've got the mark, the VP, our first foot mark. Here we are 6 feet off the ground, so here's our 6 foot high mark. The horizon line is that 5 foot distance off of the floor, so it ends up being a perfectly straight line across the horizon. Okay, so there is, in my view, what would be the, looks like the south wall. Now I'll continue on with the west wall. I can do that one in red. I think this time I'll just do something different here. I'll start out with the height information rather than up from the walls. And then working through, go ahead and run the heights of the walls. So we have now established the grid to create the east wall 1 point perspective.